Good evening, everybody. Today is December the 8th, 2020. I hope everyone is safe and doing well. This is your Board of Education meeting. This is a special meeting of the Board of Education. And as always, we call our meetings to order, and that's a pretty formal thing. And then the next thing we do is we get right down to business. And the most important business of the people in a democracy is listening to the people. And so we'll begin our meeting by turning the gavel, if you will, over to our clerk, and she will introduce our speakers. We have two, is it, or one?
We have one speaker tonight, yes. So entering the room now is Mr. Anthony McCabe, a staff member. He will be speaking about the state monitor and the future of the RCSD. Mr. McCabe, are you with us?
Yes, I just got let in.
Wonderful. Okay, when you're ready, you have 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. Hold on one sec. Okay. All right. So I am writing on behalf of myself, my colleagues, and most importantly, the current and the future students of RCSD. I'm a third-year science teacher in the district. I've seen a lot in my short time. Since day one, it's largely been a circus. I was fortunate and always will be grateful that I was placed into a school that was supportive and nurturing, not only to me, but to the students at School 50. But you know, that aside, I watched as the district struggled pretty much daily. The dysfunction of the district practices has been obvious since day one. As a first-year teacher, I was dropped into the school with no guidance on a curriculum, no strategy for best practices, and no educational support as I scrambled to prepare 3 different science courses for 7th and 8th graders. 2 of which included science I hadn't practiced in years, and 1 that included a lab and regents requirement with no tools on how to perform the labs or prepare for the regents. Education, though, largely took a backseat to the emotional needs of the students. The social emotional aspect of School 50 was what seemingly made it so different from so many of the other schools I substituted across in the district prior to full-time teaching. Students wanted to come to School 50. They behaved mostly. At the end of the year, students were devastated to have to have to move on to the unknowns of high school. And I noticed that one of the findings for turnaround in Table 4 of the state's monitor's report is that the district's too focused on social emotional issues, and we need to refocus on student outcomes for academics. And I'd argue that there won't be any advancement in student academic outcomes until the social emotional needs of our students are met in every grade and in every school. And finally, of course, we're seeing further layoffs of educators. And the question is just, when is enough? I hear and I read that the ratios are very low. I had 28 students in all my classes. And I just, you know, now off script, I just am hoping that, you know, we're moving toward change, and layoffs are only going to hurt teachers like me and students of our future who have joined and are fully committed to the district 3 years in, last in, first out. And I just, there's so much wrong. And I just hope that the new superintendent, the board, and the state monitor's report really can make some substantial changes for the district. So that's what I got for you.
Muted, Kyle.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. McCabe. We appreciate you joining us tonight. Okay, Mr. President, that is our last speaker of the evening.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Thank you, Mr. McCabe. We're used to getting about 2 or 3 speakers a night, sometimes even more. But again, if anyone is interested in speaking to the board, Madam Clerk, could you tell them how they would arrange to do that?
Sure. If persons are interested in speaking with the board or addressing the board during board meetings, please visit our website. All instructions are listed there on the boards tab, but in the interest of time, you may also email or board at boardoфeducation@rcsdk12.org. If you do so by noon of the meeting, you'll be added to the speakers list, and we will be able to provide you with information for joining us on the Zoom. If you would also like to submit comments, you may do so at the same email address, and all comments will be posted to the website as well as shared with all board members so that they can see your concerns. All right.
Want to repeat that email address just again, just in case somebody missed it?
Sure. Board of Education at rcsdk12.org.
Again, the Board of Education would encourage you all, if you have the time, to send us a note at that address, or alternatively, if you have even more time, feel free to call up before noon and arrange to speak before the board. I would remind folks, as I have in the past, that we don't want you to think that we're not interested in your comments because we don't respond or provide commentary with respect to your questions or statements, or even ask questions about your statements. This is a time that we afford our citizens to speak directly to us. We resist the temptation as best we can to respond. We just listen. Now, because we listen doesn't mean we don't respond offline. Quite regularly, what is happening is citizens are speaking or sometimes complaining. The superintendent and her staff are taking notes, and we'll reach out directly to people who have specific needs, like parents who have concerns about their children, because sometimes people do speak to the board about specific needs of their children. And when that happens, trust me, the administration is sitting there taking notes and trying to figure out how can they best respond to that particular parent. The point I want to emphasize at this point is just because we don't respond to example what the speaker just said doesn't mean that we're not interested. It just means this is a floor, this is an opportunity for citizens to speak, and we don't interrupt them. And but again, we do try to make sure this opportunity is made available to them, but in the event that someone has some concern, we also try to make sure that those concerns are responded to. All right, next item on our agenda is Commissioner Adams. Commissioner Adams, I think you have the floor, the gavel, regarding our intergovernmental relations agenda.
So first off, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Jessica, the parent rep. Good evening, community members, students, parents, administration, superintendent, and commissioners. After last week's discussion and further conversation with the CIGR committee, we have updated the proposed legislative agenda. And I'm asking for input from you all to finalize the priorities and move to our December business meeting for adoption. The following items are proposed for the final 2021 legislative agenda. Under the category of funding priorities, one is opposed mid-year state and funding cuts. 2, full funding of foundation aid, approximately $87 million. 3, restructuring the MOE with the city of Rochester. We seek an immediate increase, legislation mandating annual increases, increase fiscal independence over the money provided from the city. 4, this is one of the additional ones that we've done here, is access BOCES services at the member rate. You know, everybody except for the big 5, they get kind of like a discount for membership. So we're seeking to get that discount. With our financial situation, we need to be looking for all the discounts that we can get. So that's what we're doing with that. 5, we're going to reject changes to building aid, transportation aid, and funding of residential special education placements. We'll come back to this. I'll give anybody a chance to speak to that. 6, support a change in the regulation that requires the RCSD to appropriate the funding and oversight of the provision of charter schools, special education related services, and IEP mandated services. 7, moratorium on charter schools. I repeat, 7, moratorium on charter schools. 8, support increased funding for infrastructure to provide educational equity by minimizing the digital divide and increase broadband access. Adopted legislation resolution 17. So now there's some non-financial priorities that had not been on the list, these first two. Support the waivers of the 2021 New York State exams and tests for federal and state accountability decisions. 2, authorize legislation to establish completely virtual online high schools. Innovation is necessary to provide robust learning opportunities to students. 3, increase support to address teacher shortages in high need areas, i.e. ELA and math. Increase access to a highly qualified, diverse teaching workforce. 5, support legislation that public school districts are not responsible for assessing the substantial equivalency of education delivered in non-public schools. And 6, development and maintenance of legislative relationships with local and state lawmakers to ensure district stability. So let's talk about this, y'all. Does anybody from the administration want to address 5 and 6?
Commissioner Adams, if you will, going to the non-financial priorities, number 5, I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. When it says supports legislation that public school districts are not responsible for assessing the substantial equivalency of education delivered to non-public schools, that is current conversation, and it was really a very heavy debate and conversation previously, because school districts, public school districts must, in their geographical area boundary, assess the curriculum and what is taught in schools. And so typically that would be either like an assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction, a deputy superintendent of teaching and learning, something of that nature along those lines. So that is actually up for debate and conversation right now around what that looks like with the Board of Regents. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear what currently has to happen. So you can imagine the number of schools, non-public schools, that we would need to evaluate. So that's just an additional responsibility and expectation on administration. And then you asked for, was there something else, I'm sorry, that you wanted me to?
Yeah, maybe number 6.
Support a change in the regulation that requires RCSD to appropriate the funding and oversight of the provision of charter school special education related services and IEP mandated services. So right now, our school district, given the student, we're responsible for any student for their special education services for students in a private, parochial, or charter school. And that's a must. So our staff are currently supporting students in those 3 entities. So this one just articulates, might there be some flexibility or shift the change in responsibility around that?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
Commissioner, I had my hand raised.
Okay, I can't even.
Yeah, it's hard to see.
Okay, I can see it. I
Yeah.
just wasn't looking. My bad. Okay,
Yeah.
Commissioner, Vice President Elliott.
Thank you. With regard to the moratorium on charter schools, let me just tell you where I am on that. I just believe, there's this push, and I was at the part of the Big Five meeting, and in the state, and the Big Five has it as one of its legislative items, I believe. But here's the thing when it comes to, us wanting to have a moratorium. If we were to make sure that we're providing our students with a quality education, we don't have to worry about trying to advocate to have a moratorium on charter schools. The reason that parents choose with their feet to go to a charter or any other alternative educational program is because of the lack of education that they're getting from the schools that they, or the district that they're leaving. So, you know, while there is this energy related to having this kind of advocacy around charter schools, why don't we put our energy on trying to make sure we've got quality schools? In our budget, I think there's about $100 million that we have allocated for charter schools. That really is in our control if we're providing quality education for our children. And so, at least for us, I'm not saying not to do it per se, I'm just giving you my position on this. If we were to make sure that the children in our district were highly educated, I don't think that we would even have to worry about advocating for a moratorium on charter schools. It almost says to me, yeah, we're not educating these children, but we don't want you to send them anyplace else. How dare we tell parents not to do that? How dare we tell them they want their children educated? Even the least of our parents want their children educated, but we don't seem to have that as a part of our consciousness, that we should, first of all, on the front end, make sure every child in this district has a quality education. But no, we put the energy on the state to have a moratorium on charter schools. Our parents don't necessarily have to go to charter schools. They can go, black families now, although a very still small number, the increase of homeschooling for Black Americans is on the rise because of a number of reasons. But my point is, let's make sure that as a district and as a board, we're making sure that we're providing the quality education so that we're not having to send our kids to charter schools. This is America. We live in a competitive environment, so that you know, it's a marketplace, a competitive marketplace. And so, you know, it is what it is out there. We could be expending the energy over here within to do a moratorium on charter schools. But my position is, why don't we focus in on making sure our children have quality educations, and that our district retains that $100 million in its coffers. And then with regard to, I think there was one in terms of the curriculum, the culture competent curriculum. Am I saying that correctly? Trying to see where it is. Yeah, diverse teaching workforce. I'd like for us at some point, Commissioner, to really discuss what that means to increase access to a highly qualified diverse teaching workforce, and what does that mean on the state level? What are we asking them to do? And I think that we probably need to come up with some kind of a platform that helps to influence the state level with regard to a diverse teaching workforce. So thank you. I'll be quiet for right now.
So I'm going to respond to myself to both of those. In regards to the diverse workforce, that means like including, the policy is when it comes time for cuts, those will be the same people that be the first to leave. So there's policies in place that need to be changed in order for us to get a diverse workforce, because like I say, the last in is the first out, and we have to take a look at that. But in reference to the moratorium, I like to say we need to be able to multitask. And from all of my advocacy, you can never be focused on one thing, because while you're fighting in one corner, here they come in the other corner. And see, so my thing is, like, I'm totally fine with, my kids are doing fine in RCSD. I love it. But by just because of that, I'm not going to lose focus on these charter schools becoming overwhelming. I seen what happened. I was in New Orleans last year. I seen what happened down there, and the whole school system is charter school. And I can tell you from the parents, forget about what you might read by these the profiteers. They'll be talking a good one, but you talk to the parents from New Orleans, and you'll find out that that school system is not working, and that is my concern. That's why I support a moratorium. We can't allow them to just overwhelm us like that. And we have to be able to do more than one thing at one time, multitask. Any other commissioners have something? I don't see any hands.
I have my
Commissioner
hand
LeBron has
up.
her hand up.
Yeah.
Okay. Who? Commissioner LeBron?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. I didn't.
So just a couple of things. I do want to say, you know, on the other side of it, I do know parents who have children in charter who started off as RCSD and just were not happy and just had a negative experience to the point where it pushed them to charter. However, I also know parents who were in charter who had also a negative experience and left and ran and came back to RCSD. And then I know parents who had bad experiences on both sides that then decided to figure out how to homeschool. So I think when we have these conversations, like the reality is that each parents are having different experiences, and it's not just a district where they're having negative experiences, they're having negative experiences in charters too. I will support a memorandum on charter school. They're here though, and I hate that we have these conversations like charters just popped up. Like they have been here my entire life in Rochester, and I've been here since I was 19. Charters have been here for a number of years. But with that said, right, we don't want to support the growth of charter knowing that it's costing us and is detrimental to our own enrollment. And it is going to eventually hit a tipping point where we are going to, as a district, self-destruct in this way of declining enrollment revenue because it's going to charters. And this is the fight that people are talking about. We are losing a battle right now on the front end for public education. So definitely will support that. I just wanted some clarity too on a couple of things. On number 5, when you say reject changes to building aid, transportation aid, and funding on residential special education placements, this is for the state legislators, Mr. Adams?
Yes, this is the one.
We're asking them to reject the changes that are going to be proposed by either the governor. Is that what we're asking? I just needed some clarity around that.
So,
Mr. Adams, I can answer that if you'd like.
okay.
So this particular legislation, Commissioner LeBron, good evening, everyone, comes from the Council of School Superintendents. And one of the areas that they're looking at is building aid changes that will make it possible for district leaders to make or keep promises to their communities on the local share of future capital projects. On the transportation aid, it would not match the real costs as tight labor markets drive up the compensation. Districts are going to offer more to attract and retain our drivers. And it really does focus on, right now, one of the issues that we're looking at in relation to our transportation aid reimbursement is with COVID-19, we are looking at a significant deficit and looking at asking the governor and the legislature to give us the formula prior to COVID for our next operating cycle to ensure that we can meet the needs of those costs.
Okay, so I just want to add, like, I know that this is a draft and bullet points. I don't think anybody would have understood what you just read, Marisol, by reading this. And if this is an act of state legislators, then I want us to be very clear to them so that they understand what our asks are in these bullet points and what it means. You know, the state right now has a $60 billion deficit over the course of 4 years, they said. They also said that they don't not believe that federal help is going to get the state out of this deficit. So I want us to be very specific in our ask. I know that they're also looking at ways to increase revenue for the state. The other two pieces, Mr. Adams, is a non-fiscal ask so it's further down on this, I think, Kali, of your, yeah, number 4. I've said this before, I'll repeat it here again since it's coming up on the request to the legislators. I do believe that the state legislators can be very bold in how they address this for school districts across New York State, and particularly urban school districts. When you look at our makeup and our ratio of Black and brown teachers to Caucasian white teachers in the district, we are disproportionate. We are not the only district disproportionate in urban education in the state of New York. And there are other states that classify Black and brown teachers who are in low percentages in their districts or in their states, if they're in their workforce, as a special classified group, a protected class. And so I want us to be, again, very detailed in what we're asking the state legislators to consider, and potentially give them examples of other states that have passed protected class for the workforce for Black and brown teachers, so that they are last in, but not the first out when it's time to make cuts. And I would like us to be that bold in that request. And it's something for this board to consider, but I would love us to provide that language and prior examples from other states that do have this already in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner LeBron, for that.
Commissioner Adams?
Commissioner Powell. Oh, go ahead.
Commissioner Powell.
Thank you. I just want to speak to the charter school moratorium very briefly, partly for Commissioner Clark's benefit. To my knowledge, this district has never taken a legislative position opposing charter schools en masse. From the beginning, our position was very similar to what Commissioner Elliott articulated, that competition and free market is a good thing, that if it forced the district to change the way it does things and become more quote unquote customer friendly or parent friendly, that we welcome the competition. And in fact, that in part, the district hasn't changed the way it's dealt with parents and made it more parent friendly, but and in part, there's a resistance to the idea of competition within the institution. That's my perception of things. The issue and the need for it to be on our legislative agenda is if RCSD becomes insolvent because it has to be a pass-through, a conduit of state aid to the charter school entities, and in the process becomes insolvent, then both the charter schools and the district lose. So I think the biggest argument in favor of this position, the moratorium, is simply to allow the RCSD and the charter schools that already exist to have the opportunity, fiscal opportunity to survive. And I say that because in the beginning of charter school legislation, Albany was a target. A very wealthy individual in the Albany area was opening charter schools left, right, and center, and his stated objective was to destroy the Albany public school system. In the end, a lot of those charter schools failed. So, you know, in a free market, the question becomes who really. You know, who's really the loser. Sometimes it is the charter schools. But I just wanted to sort of make that statement to both affirm Commissioner Elliott, because her points are very valid, but also to articulate that, to my knowledge, this board has never passed a resolution opposing charter schools. And this doesn't really do that either. It just argues in favor of a moratorium. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, Commissioner Clark.
Yes, I just wanted to respond also because I do agree wholeheartedly with Commissioner Elliott, because I believe that, choice is important for Rochester residents. And I also have experienced similar experiences as Commissioner LeBron. I have a lot of friends who have sent their children to charter schools, were not satisfied, and re-enrolled them in the district and vice versa. But at the end of the day, I do feel that what we really need to focus on is ensuring that we are delivering a quality education. And if we do a good job at that, then we can reintegrate that $91 million into the Rochester City School District. But I was on the meeting, the state board meeting, and I do understand that there is a gluttony of charter schools in some areas, and we do need to curb the new charter schools. So I would support the moratorium on charter schools, but at the same point in time, I also support parents' choice on the existing charter schools.
Thank you. And I just like to add that that's what this is, a moratorium. This isn't an agenda to eliminate the charter schools. It's a moratorium. And the reason that it's on the agenda is because the community asks for it. This is what the community wants. And that's what we're up here representing. That's what I'm representing. And so I just had to state that. And let me see if there's any other hands up. No. President White, you got nothing?
All right, I'm ready to go.
Commissioner Adams, Commissioner Malloy has her hand up.
Okay, Commissioner Malloy, sorry, I didn't see it.
No, I just put my hand up. I just want to say that I, respect Vice President Elliott's position. I understand that rationale, and I certainly respect all the other commissioners and their input. I would say that, I fully support a moratorium on charter schools. I understand that there are some charter schools in our district that are doing good things for our students, but our ability to provide a quality education for public school students, if we have an oversaturation of charter schools in our district, that greatly curtails our ability to provide a sound education. And when we talk about competition, when we talk about, that implies that there are winners and then losers in education. And I'm not willing to take that risk with all of our public school students. And with all due respect, that is the rhetoric of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. And we can't view education in that manner. We have an obligation to all of our students and our entire community. So I do therefore support a moratorium on any new charter schools. I'm not in favor of eliminating the ones that we already have, but we need to make sure that we're actually looking at partnerships instead of looking at this as a game of winners and or losers. So that's my position. Thank you.
All right.
All right, you ready? You through, Commissioner Adams?
Yeah, I'm gonna hand it over back to you.
All right, well, thank you, sir. That was a good conversation, just so that we're clear, as some of my colleagues say for the record, I agree with most of what was said today in the last few minutes. Indeed, I do not support expansion of existing charters in this area or any place else. I think there's sufficient number of charter schools here. I also believe these are not mutually exclusive approaches to say, listen, while I support a moratorium, I also believe we need to do a better job, and I think everybody has said that, at educating our children. And if we do that, we will probably see, as Commissioner Clark, I think as Lloyd has implied, everybody, and Commissioner Elliott too, Vice President Elliott, we will see the return of our students. And quite honestly, we see that pretty regularly anyway. They sometimes, as a number of people pointed out, they sometimes return to us anyways because they don't provide, those charter schools isn't the green grass that many of our parents thought it was. So, but again, these aren't mutually exclusive approaches. We can have the moratorium, but we also need to understand, and everybody understands, that's why we're here on this evening at 6:10 at night, because we realize we've got to improve our district. So thank you, Commissioner Adams, for those comments. Thank you for putting that on the legislative agenda. And we will follow through with that. Yeah, Commissioner Adams, you want to say something else?
Yeah, we need a motion to move this for the business meeting in December.
Motion.
It's been moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, Commissioner Adams. I guess we'll go ahead and take a vote if that's okay with you.
Yeah. All those in favor? Go ahead.
All those in favor of approving the legislative agenda as described by Commissioner Adams indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Seems like the ayes have it. Thank you again, Commissioner Adams. I should note, Commissioner Adams pointed out that, Commissioner Adams, I think you point out that you are joined today by your parent rep. Is that right?
Yes, I am. Jessica.
Jessica. Jessica, are you on camera? We ought to see you.
I am. Hi.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you, Commissioner Adams, for introducing Jessica. Jessica, welcome. Is this your first meeting as a representative of Committee of Intergovernmental Relations?
We've been meeting to discuss the agenda items in a smaller group, but it's my first big board meeting. Yeah.
So do you want to just, I know my colleagues wouldn't mind, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, where your kids go to school, that kind of stuff?
Sure. I have 3 girls in the Children's School of Rochester in 5th grade, 2nd grade, and 3rd grade. So.
Awesome. Thank you very much. You're obviously very busy with your children and your family, but to take this time out to help the rest of the thousands of other children in the district is really appreciated. So thank you for doing that. And people only seeing a portion of it. Thank you. All right. I should let folks know we have a number of other committees. I know my colleagues will want to remind the community of this. We have, in addition to Commissioner Adams' committee, that is the Committee on Intergovernmental Relations, as you could hear by his conversation. It's about all the other organizations and operations that exist in our community, Albany, City Hall, and so forth, and how we relate to them. Then we also have the Equity and Student Achievement Committee that is chaired by Vice President Elliott. We also have the Policy Committee, which is chaired by Commissioner Clark. We also have the HR Committee, which is chaired by Vice President Elliott. The Governance Committee, which is chaired by Commissioner Malloy. Finance, which is chaired by Commissioner LeBron. And finally, Audit, which is chaired by Commissioner Powell. And you will hear from Commissioner Powell and our audit function and the Auditor General a little bit later on this evening. Having said that, why don't we turn the gavel over to Commissioner Clark for a second reading of our policy number 4765. Commissioner Clark? You're muted.
Thank you again, President White. And I want to thank all the commissioners and everyone who's in viewing the meeting tonight. As you indicated earlier, we're here to review the second reading of policy number 4765, which is the online learning and course credit policy. I do have Dr. Morris, who's here to review this. I know this is a second reading and it was also reviewed by the Committee of the Whole. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Morris and she can go over the policy and we can go for a vote.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. Thank you, Commissioner Clark. The online learning and course credit policy is being proposed for you all today to help incorporate the approach that we have now we have distance learning opportunities for our students. And we want to make sure that we are providing a path for district approved online courses to help them being able to earn course credits towards the Regents diplomas that they are earning in accordance with this policy. So there is a need for us to have a policy on our books for a definition of what our online course policy is, and what our process will be in making sure that we have a review of the programming that we're providing in an online fashion. What are the procedures and the criteria that we have for admitting students into online courses, making sure that we have a method for evaluation of these online courses, and making sure that there is equitable access to these courses that we provide in an online environment, making sure that there's support for our students who have courses via the online environment, making sure that there is a reasonable budgetary impact for the use of these courses. And lastly, to make sure that these courses are in alignment with the New York State learning standards. So we're hoping that in the incorporation of this policy, that we can use it particularly in light of the COVID emergency, where we are reliant on the use of online courses, and making sure that this provides a definition and a structure for the online courses that we are providing via the environments that we have in district, to make sure our students have that definition in the policies that we have for the district.
Are you taking questions as we
Yes,
go?
I was getting ready to open it up for questions now.
Great. May I?
Sure.
Thank you. On that last paragraph, Director May, it's very brief, but it just occurred to me that this paragraph was developed with COVID in mind, but is it possible that going forward, once we're back to 100% in-person learning, that we could switch to online learning whenever we have a snow day?
So we can provide, if we had a snow day, that would be one day, for example, of work. And we would probably utilize the same approach that we have now in terms of asking for asynchronous learning to occur during during a snow day. So this is actually coming up with a definition for an online course that would be delivered during the course of either a semester or a term, and it allows for actual credit to be attributed for that period. So that would be a little different than just a time that we're pausing for a short-term pause, such as a snow day.
Okay.
But that's a great question.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Adams has his hand up also.
So I would just like to say that I'm totally in support of this. COVID might be new, but online learning is not new. I have friends that they've been getting credits in college for years. So I think we might even just be behind the ball. We're a little late with this, so I totally support this.
Right, thanks. Thank you. Commissioner LeBron?
Yeah, so sorry about that. I had to jump off and then jump back on, but I'm back. I just have a question, I guess, around in reading this, like the first, well, not the first, but the second to last line, the budgetary impact of use of blended online course, and like whether, so first and foremost, let me just say my previous experience with one of our previous superintendents with online learning and credit recovery was like, throw everybody in there so we can get a higher graduation rate, and no method to the madness, just focusing on like achieving this goal of higher graduation rate, right? Whether it made sense or not for the student, we just kind of did that. And that drove me absolutely insane, because there was no systemic approach to how we address this and assessing whether it's a good fit for that student or not. But I guess I'm wondering, are we also in this policy looking at future for this district that we do move some more courses over the time period of more of online learning, I guess? And are we setting that foundation with this policy?
So to answer your question, I went and I did a little bit of research and background to find out just where in the state this exists in terms of an online course policy and our echo of it within our regulations here. So as recently as 2011, the state was looking at and considering the different types of credits that students learn in the various modalities, such as blended courses or online courses. So are they getting in a hybrid model with a supplement online, et cetera? So what we are trying to do now through this policy is make sure that we provide a definition at the district level that allows us to have a definition of courses that we're bringing into our district. And we would use our courses as a way to provide additional coursework to our students. So this is just providing an alternate pathway, not a substitute of pathway. So the alternative pathway allows our students, for example, if there was a if we wanted to make sure that our students are receiving an advanced placement course in the future, not just during a COVID environment, but in the future, if we wanted to provide that opportunity for that coursework for our students, the online or blended coursework model is a way that we can provide that enrichment and that advanced coursework for those students. So it's an alternative pathway right now that we want to make sure that we provide definition and a rule about how we want it to move forward. And that's why we wanted to propose this to be incorporated into the policies, not necessarily as a substitution for our diploma or our general education requirements.
Commissioner LeBron, one thing that I've been quietly working on, but like to step it up, is though we do have some students in our district who do much better online than they do in-person, brick and mortar attendance. And we knew this before the COVID-19 environment. So what I'd like to see beyond this is if we have students that are taking advantage of this, I'd like to have a waiver to allow it to count as seat time, because that's tied into aid, right? So we have to think about that and be very cognizant of that. So I broached that conversation a little before I left the state education department, and there was interest in that because we're not getting credit for that for those students who are taking advantage of, not taking advantage, but who are earning course credit this way. It has integrity. And I said, we would just need to build a mechanism to show that the students, and we have the stamped time of when they start and when they end the course, and there are checkpoints. So this is something that we want to further pursue, as Dr. Morris said, as an alternative pathway, because this is a very viable option for some of our scholars. And I would like to be able to honor them with, to acknowledge their attendance when they participate.
Got it. And then on the last piece of this, the emergency utilization, I know a number of school districts across the state, their school boards have a state of an emergency policy, and they did a declaration under a state of an emergency, which is very detailed. It also allowed the superintendent to make decisions without board approval because they were in a state of emergency, and superintendents needed to make very rapid decisions around things. And I share that here because I would love for us as a district to have a state of emergency policy. And I say that to Clark so he can take that on over the course of this year because we're still going to be under COVID provisions in 2021, and look at how other school districts and what that means. But I think if we have that up front and then we declare it as a school district, a state of emergency, and had a policy that we can then give to parents so that they understand what that means for a district of this size and how we would be moving forward, I think we can align some things under that then will tie right back into the emergency utilization piece of this policy.
That sounds great. If you could send me some districts that have that, I'd be
Yeah,
more
I
than
actually have that. I requested it from other districts, so I can forward that to you.
great. Thank you. Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say kudos. I fully support this measure. I think that in addition to alternative pathways for our students, we're not just talking about emergency situations, but also enrichment opportunities. And so kudos, this is great. I do have a couple of questions. Well, first of all, I do support any opportunity that we have in our district to expand enrichment for all of our students, offering potentially AP level classes or dual credit courses through universities for that high quality programming for our motivated students. And we realize that this is an opportunity for students to have access to that if it's not offered within their home schools. And having that available online, it's not just about credit recovery, but can also offer the enrichment that so many of our students need. They've got to have that access. So online opportunities are just critical for that. So kudos. I do wonder, are there going to be opportunities under this plan for perhaps summer learning? I know that we have students who sometimes want to double up on math. Maybe not during the same school year, but will this be extended into our summer school program so that students who want to perhaps get credit in advance, whether that's high school economics or whether they want to take 2 years of math sequentially and they want to get it done in the summer prior so that they can take an advanced math course in the fall, are we allowing for those types of opportunities for our students? So just a quick question for Dr. Morris.
Thank you. That's a great question. We are currently looking to reimagine and re-envision what our summer program is going to look like, both using this information that we have here, but through the flexibility of the online learning delivery model and looking to see where our successes are and our challenges are right now as we're delivering it in a COVID environment. But we're also trying to make sure that what we deliver in the summer, as you mentioned, it can't just be remedial. It needs to also allow for enrichment and advancement and provide that foundational preparation for our students as they move into the school year and beyond. So that is part of the consideration that we are putting into play as we redesign and re-envision summer. But yes, absolutely, that is part of our consideration.
I just think that is so fantastic. And so kudos to you and to Dr. Myers-Small. Having those opportunities is so unique. And if you look at some of the opportunities offered by our suburban districts that are in surrounding areas, they don't have any programs that are comparable in any way. And so for us to do something to engage in this type of initiative really speaks volumes to where we want to go as a district, and providing access to this type of thing is innovative. And so kudos. Thank you.
Great,
Thank you. Vice President Elliott.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. I just want to also go on record supporting this policy. Those of you who've been around, you've heard me say quite often, at some point, we're not going to need a whole lot of brick and mortar. And I was saying that as we were doing a $1.2 million facilities modernization project. And the reason being because there's so many, first of all, so many ways of learning. And I think part of the issue with our students is, and particularly these generations, is that, they don't necessarily always sit down in a, 4 or 5 rows and, have the teacher to just tell them, what the information is without there being some participation in their own learning. And so I think that this online learning, it really is going to be the future. I sort of envision this as being the future. And I think it could be beneficial to our students, particularly those students of ours who are in high school and have other things that they're having to do. For example, they're working. They're taking care of their children. They're taking care of siblings. They're helping to support, their mother and father in some way. So I think that giving our students this kind of flexibility, this kind of latitude through online learning is going to be very beneficial. And I can almost envision that we're going to see an increase in graduation rates. And I mean, to Commissioner LeBron's point, the real kind of learning to take place. And while I believe that if you got the diploma, they teach us this in our doctorate programs. You don't pay to learn, you pay to get that degree, and then you teach yourself afterwards. And so I know that that's what I tell my niece all the time. You have to continue to learn. And so I just think this is a great opportunity for us. And I think that we're going to see more positive results from this type of learning in the future. So I do support. I just want to go on record saying that, Commissioner Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. Is there any more discussion? If not, I'll turn it over to President White to take a motion so that we can present this at our December 17th board meeting.
Take the motion, Commissioner Clark.
Oh, I can make the motion?
I second that.
All right.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. President White, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner Clark. All right, next item on our agenda is, hold on a second. I think it was, sorry. I caught myself looking at there it is. All right, I'm operating off from two screens. Next item on our agenda is Auditor General Anissa Henry Wheeler is going to talk about our whistleblower hotline. I would just note for my colleagues' information, it is now 6:31. Our agenda indicated that this portion of our meeting was going to be completed by 6:30. So we're running a bit behind schedule. And the reason why I mentioned that is there is a very hefty audit committee that must be convened and was supposed to be convened at 6:30. So we're going to listen attentively to Anissa regarding this whistleblower hotline update or presentation. And again, we'll try to be as succinct and as short as we can with our questions and comments so that we can get to the auditor's report. Anissa?
Great. Thank you. So it was my understanding that there was a desire to have a whistleblower presentation in response to the DE report that identified there was a recommendation asking to create a mechanism by which staff can provide the district leadership with open and honest critical feedback without fear of retaliation. And so my intent is to speak on that particular point. But in order to do that, and for the benefit of the significant transition we've had on the board, I just wanted to step back through the various whistleblowers that we have. So I'll go rather quickly, understanding I don't have all night to talk about this. But first I wanted to mention, which I won't get into detail, but I do want to mention that there is a Medicaid hotline, and the Medicaid hotline is actually under a board policy. And in the board policy, it is a requirement as well as for Medicaid purposes. So in that hotline, the policy identifies the language necessary and identifies the need for a compliance program that enables anonymous reporting. When I just go through that, next slide. Just at a high level, there's a toll-free number that comes in. It is allowable for employees, service providers, etc. It is for Medicaid billing issues as it relates to wrongdoing. It's directed and managed by the Medicaid compliance officer who reports directly to CFO Pierce so that there is direct supervision and oversight for that call. There is anonymous calls and it's confidential if someone leaves their name. There is a note, I know it was communicated that there is a plan for a formal report on the Medicaid hotline that is supposed to be happening soon. So I just wanted to make sure I identified this is a hotline that exists at the district and it is mandated. Next slide. At a high level, just to make sure you know, upon any report of wrongdoing by calling this line, they actually do get the content and find out what the concern is. The compliance officer makes a determination. Is it truly a Medicaid hotline issue? If it is, they'll investigate. Otherwise, they'll collaborate with HR, legal, or specialized services and finance as they need to. Currently, for this school year, there are no active reports, but I've decided to provide that high-level information so that you have that awareness. Next slide. We have a board whistleblower policy, 9645. In that policy, we are looking for improper governmental action and wrongdoing by district officers and employees. We have had this one in place for quite some time. I would probably date it back to somewhere in the neighborhood of 2007 or 8 when I first got here. And it is protecting employees who in good faith are reporting improper practices. This is another venue that they can report anonymous or confidentially. Slide. Under the hotline, there's a 800 number that can call in for the particular hotline. They have a method for them to confidentially report any illegal or unethical matters. That also comes directly to my office. Anonymous and confidential calls are there if names are provided. And actually on that hotline on the 800 number, I also give them the opportunity, if they don't want to leave a message, to directly call my cell phone 24/7 in the event someone wants to speak to a live person. Slide. High level at the report. Dave Brown, who has retired, was actually the main person who did this. I'm doing this work now, and I'll likely have some assistance from Jacqueline Farabelle on my team. However, upon report of wrongdoing, we are going to document the content, try to understand what's happening, make sure that if it's an improper governmental action, which would include fraud, waste, or abuse, we would then determine, we would evaluate the fact finding and determine where we need to go as far as next steps. Obviously, for the determination, we do consult and interact with legal, HR, safety and security information systems as needed. In the majority of the cases that have happened, slide, are generally things where someone is calling and it's a lot of content as it relates to regular operating issues that are adequately supported by administration. In the 1920 school year, there were only 6 whistleblower calls that were reported with required action. All of those were handled by administration, and there are no active reports currently in 2021. Next slide. The topic you actually, I think at the high level, we're very interested in is looking for the mechanism under the critical feedback line. Based upon this particular recommendation, to respond to it, we decided we would utilize the existing line, and we split the line basically. So you would call the same number for either the board's whistleblower hotline or the critical feedback line. And it's an option to call, dial, press 1 or press 2 as it relates to this line. And it gives the people in it, they can just leave a message and it's a free fall. They can go ahead and say anything they want to and offer whatever critical feedback they would like to the line. Next slide. So that would be the first. It's the 800 number that we previously spoke of, and it allows the caller to leave a message and state whatever concerns they might very well have. So that's where that line is. Next slide. We also have implemented an online communication forum, and in the online communication forum, it's on the district website. Actually, at the bottom of the board at the district-wide website, there are links for the Medicaid hotline, the whistleblower hotline, as well as the critical feedback line. In this, we just really created a Google Doc, and it allows the individual to really identify who they are they employer or an employee, a student, or whatever, and it allows them to state who it is that they're trying to target for feedback. They might say the board, a building, a department, or whatever. Sometimes the district location's involved, sometimes it's just a general comment, and we give them an opportunity to document their concern. And we actually, in this case, ask them if they have a suggestion for improvement, because just a concern without the thought of improvement is not necessarily a help. Next slide. In the 1920 year, there were 11 calls, which is since the creation of that feedback line, and we're reporting separately, of course, feedback from whistleblower. And the general concerns really fell around school culture and environment. There were 5 reports in that area. Special education, there were 2. There were 2 financial concerns, 2 for other. There were no calls reported in 2021, which is likely due to schools being closed. Next slide. For the benefit of the board, I've identified the critical feedback caller recommendations that exist there. I see you, Vice President Elliott. I will get through this slide and then call on you. And so what I tried to do is identify the specific recommendations that have been provided. In one case, they were looking for enforcing roles of teachers and paras because there were concerns about paras taking on too heavy a responsibility and felt there were certain things that teachers should be doing. So that was one recommendation. Another is perform unannounced school visits to make sure they can check and make sure school culture is what they expect it to be. Under the financial concerns, one said fire all individuals responsible for financial issues. The other is to make pay cuts to address the financial issues. There was a recommendation to improve leadership training for both school leaders and teachers, came in 2 different reports. There was a look for increasing classroom oversight to make sure students are being treated appropriately in classrooms and to comply with special education requirements. And the last being to mandate face masks in buildings. Please note, every caller does not necessarily offer a recommendation. They just might call and that would be what would happen next. I would go to Vice President Elliott. You had your hand up. You are muted.
Thank you. Anissa, this may not be a question directly to the whistleblower policy itself, but when there was something with regard to Medicaid compliant that you referenced in your slide, and it brought up a document that I saw that I just needed to ask the superintendent about. There's an article from the Bonadillo group that says, will you be in compliance with the pandemic operations law, which refers to the fact that all public employees must have a detailed operations plan to ensure continuation of operations amidst a public health emergency. Does the district have that information? And what it involves is having a listing of job titles and employees who are on the front lines or who are considered essential workers. And it takes effect April 1st, 2021. So I just wanted to know if the superintendent is aware of that. And if not, we may want to take a look into that. It is the Pandemic Operations Law, Chapter 168, laws of 2020. So if we have not been aware of that, we may want to take a look at that.
Vice President Elliott, that's something that I'll work on with Dr. Miller.
Okay.
I think for me, what will be helpful is to understand what essential employees are, because it's, when you look at it from the pandemic, I mean, superintendents aren't even, they used to be essential, they aren't. So I just need to know what's defined as essential. And once I understand that, then we can build that and make sure. We do have job descriptions for individuals. We would just need to make sure that they were readily available and they are clearly on that list of those individuals considered essential.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Last slide. And so there was intent or questions about, is there anything we need to do differently and what should we do going forward? And so when I look at the critical feedback line, I think on the first, there was initial activity when we first introduced the line. There was some activity, there was some interest, there was a lot of visibility. However, schools being closed due to COVID is likely why the activity has dropped off. I do think one recommendation would be for us to periodically communicate the existence of the critical feedback line to make sure there's continued awareness. The second item is that we originally planned to perform, let the external auditor in. We originally planned to perform monthly reporting because we were expecting a large volume of feedback, but with the timing and the lack, it's not really a pounding issue or it's not a readily available. I really think the feedback is being addressed very adequately at the school building level, at the superintendent's office level. There's really not tons of calls that are coming in through this line. So one thing that I did want to recommend is to go to quarterly board reporting of whatever recommendations that are there. Of course, if there was some critical issue that came up, we would certainly address it, but we recognize that as we have, even with this remote learning, our school buildings are getting the brunt of calls and concerns, and the leaders are clearly addressing timely the concerns as they are coming up. and they always have the availability to call the superintendent's office and get a timely response through the chief, et cetera.
Being genetically related is not the only way to achieve kinship.
Somebody needs to mute themselves.
And that actually concludes my report for this matter.
Are there any further questions or comments for Anissa? Looking at my list and I don't see any. So thank you, Anissa, for doing that. Of course, I can't imagine anyone would be opposed to having quarterly updates given on these particular lines. Perhaps that could be done, what you're suggesting, that be done at audit or in governance or just at a regular meeting of the board. Do you have a proposal for the board?
I will develop a proposal and work with our board clerk to determine the timing to get in quarterly reporting.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Powell, I see you raise your hand.
Only to essentially ask what you did. Do we need to take formal action to direct quarterly reporting, or is it just a gentleman's agreement acceptable?
Well, what I'm thinking is it's just an agenda item that we're committing ourselves to put on our agenda. So I don't know that we need a formal resolution, but Anissa is our Auditor General, and so the board has said that they want this quarterly reports because nobody had any indication they oppose it. So Anissa, if you could put those, offer those on a quarterly basis. And as you said, work with Kalia to make sure that they are calendared so that every board member knows when they're coming during the course of the coming year. So we'll get 4 next year. If you two could work on making sure they end up on our calendars, that would be great in advance. Okay, Anissa?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have, Anissa, don't go anywhere because you know we're gonna need you in a few minutes, but we have to first consider a resolution. You all received resolution 506 in your, by email, I assume. It's a resolution that relates to extension of an employee's probationary period. Can I get a motion to advance resolution 506 for discussion?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Assuming that there are no questions that have to be asked in executive session, because I'm sure you all would say that to me. Are there any other questions or comments regarding resolution 506 before we vote on it? Looking at my participant list, I don't see any questions, hands being raised. So let's go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor of resolution 506 indicate by making sure your video camera is on and by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Madam Clerk, have you recorded that vote?
I have, thank you.
All right, we're set there. So that would leave us to return to our Auditor General, Anissa Henry Wheeler. Anissa, you're gonna, actually, I apologize. I'm gonna turn the gavel over to Commissioner Powell. I'm sure we'll somehow find a way to ask Anissa questions, but Commissioner Powell, I'm sorry.
That's fine. But before we do that though, Mr. President, we skipped the second bullet, and given that we're beyond our time, do we want to just take that item up on the next meeting?
The second bullet, I'm looking at the, what second bullet are you referring to?
My agenda says after the legislative agenda, it's a board developmental budget discussion. Or was that taken off? Was that never on the agenda?
No, I think you probably had a draft agenda from last week, Thursday. Okay. That was taken off.
Great, if it's not, okay, we're good, okay.
All right.
Well,
so
thank you. Thank you very much. So as I convene the audit committee meeting, we will start by introducing Kathy Barrett. Well, she's already got her presentation up, so you'll see her as soon as I stop talking and allow her to start talking. Okay, the floor is yours, Kathy.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. So I was going to kind of walk through my exit presentation and feel free to interrupt me at any time and ask any questions that you might have. Do you want to advance a couple of slides to the audit plan, please? So every year we develop an audit plan. We talk to NISA, we talk to your accounting department, and we develop the audit plan based on risks that are identified from previous audits, from what's going on in the industry, and from just generally accepted auditing standards. So the risks that were identified were management override of internal controls, which is a general risk that we assess on all engagements. And we address that by reviewing of client adjustments, reviewing of their accounting records, verified that any adjustments had a purpose and has adequate supporting documentation and were appropriately approved. We had no findings. Management's compliance with laws and regulations. This was specifically because of the non-compliance issue we identified last year with over expenditure of your budget. I'm happy to say we had no instances of this finding this year. We do, as part of our government auditing standards, we do review your compliance with other general municipal law and education law standards. And again, we found no instances of non-compliance. Revenue is another general concern on all audits. We address that by performing substantive tests of your revenue. We do confirmations of not only the city contributions, but we get onto the state aid website and we verify the revenues that you record with respect to state aid to those reported by them, as well as a reconciliation of your federal grant funds. Again, we had no findings there, and we deemed that all revenue and related receivables were fairly stated. As a general comment, the audit went very well again this year. We did get a little bit of a late start. We started about a week later than we had anticipated, just because it took a little bit longer to get the accounting records. But even with starting a week later, we were able to meet all deadlines imposed by the school district and the city. And we did this audit completely remotely. We're generally in your offices for about 3 weeks. We had to turn around and switch that to a complete remote environment. I want to thank the accounting department for all of their efforts in doing this remotely. It was a big lift for them to have to upload all of the financial data that we need to audit the financial statements up to a secure website so that we can work on it. And they did it. They were very diligent. They got us all the information that we needed in a very timely manner. So I wanted to give the accounting department our appreciation for doing that. And we know it was a big lift this year, and formally thank you. So with that, financial highlights. If you read nothing of the 140-page CAF or thereabout, I would encourage you to read the management discussion and analysis that directly precedes the financial schedules in the statements. It does a really good job of kind of telling the story behind the financial statements, and that is written by management. And we review that information and make sure that it's not inconsistent with the information that we audit. The first set of schedules in the CAFR are the government-wide financial statements, and they are on pages 35 and 36. So these two pages, they pull together all of your fund basis information that are on the subsequent pages into one column. So it looks more like one business entity, like you would see in a for-profit entity. But it also pulls in all the long-term assets and long-term liabilities that are not reported on your fund basis financial statements. And you do have some significant long-term assets and long-term liabilities that aren't presented on your fund basis. So with that information included, your liabilities and deferred inflows exceeded your assets and deferred outflows by $623.9 million. And that's the number that you see at the very bottom of that, of page 35. The next page shows a decrease in your net position of $40.2 million. And this compares to a decrease of $87.6 million in 2019. Overall, on your government-wide financial statements, your revenues increased by about $9.8 million. There's about a $24 million increase in your state aid, another $3 million in state and local grants, a decrease in your food service revenue of $6.4 million. Your interest earned primarily on debt proceeds was down about $5.7 million, and your capital revenue, primarily the Smart School Bonds Act funding that you received, was down about $3 million in comparison to the previous year. And on your expenditure side, your expenses decreased by $37.3 million. And that was primarily due to cost-cutting measures that were made in December of 2019, as well as cost savings from the COVID pandemic, primarily in the area of transportation. So if you go to the next slide, I tried to provide a reconciliation of your change in your fund balance, which is, again, on the subsequent pages. So you had a positive change in your fund balance of $10.9 million. Now, to come back to your government-wide change in net position, what I did is I showed the individual components. So you had fixed asset purchases that exceeded depreciation. So that added to your assets of $64.2 million. You had an increase in your debt. You had the $35 million from the state, which is a loan that has to be repaid. You had $25.9 million in new bonds, $56.2 million in FMP bonds, less your debt, less the debt payments that you made. So that decreased your net position by $27.6 million. The other two items are items that are beyond your control and have to do with the first one is your participation in the state and teachers retirement system. So your portion of the liability, the unfunded liability in those systems is $43.1 million. And then you have the increase in your OPEB liability, which is somewhat out of your control, into the fact that you have an agreement to provide health insurance benefits to your employees. If you were able to change that contractual obligation, you could impact that number. But lacking that, your increase in your long-term OPEB liability was $44.6 million. So that's how we come up with the $10.9 million positive change in fund balance to the $40.2 million decrease in the net position. Do you have any questions on that? I know it's a little bit complicated, but try to give it at least a little bit of an overview and keep it as simple as possible. Okay, with that, we'll
I have a question. I'm sorry. I don't know who's managing the hands up, but I just have a question on this piece here. And I know that you said it looks like even after we subtract the debt that we have a $10.9 million in our fund balance. one of the things that we did and that we were allowed to do from City Council last year was use $10 million from capital improvements through the MOU right now. The waiver, the MOU agreement states that we have to take $10 million into capital improvement projects. That's part of the agreement with the city. So last year, in order to balance the budget, that portion was waived by City Council. And I know that they have already indicated that they will not waive it for this upcoming budget year. But I'm wondering if that leaves us the 10.9 million, where does the $10 million waiver that we received to use that money in our regular general funds is I guess, shown in this chart here?
Well, it would be an impact on your fund balance. I believe you did modify your budget for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I mean. So if we had not had that agreement from City Council, would our fund balance then reflect the 10.9 million if 10 million came from that waiver from City Council?
It probably would have been $10 million less.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, that's an overly simplistic explanation. There's a lot of things that go into that 10.9, but yes, it probably would have been less.
Yeah, and I just asked because City Council has already said that they will not waive it again, and they require us to take 10 million out of the 119 million to specifically fund capital improvement projects on our buildings and so forth. So just wondering what that would have looked like in the final fund balance that you're presenting if that was not waived. And it's something we need to consider for 2021's budget, that they're not going to waive it and add that 10 million to 10 million that we need to come up with in our regular budget.
Any other questions?
Okay, well, is that your full presentation, Kathy, or are you just pausing at that point?
Oh, I was just pausing.
Good, thank you.
So the next few pages talk about the general fund, which is the fund that you're most concerned about controlling your costs and your revenues. So your general fund, your operations resulted in a surplus this year of $75.1 million, and that increased your fund balance to $82.2 million. And it was a result of the budget cuts in response to the operating deficit in 2019. That we approximated at about $8.6 million. The additional aid from New York State, which on your fund basis comes in as revenue rather than a loan, of $35 million, and also some cost savings attributed to the pandemic and the shutdown, and that was estimated at about $30.7 million, and that was based on budget to actual results. The cost savings attributed to the shutdown were in primarily three different areas: operation of facilities, transportation, and also temporary staff. However, it's important to understand that you are aided on every dollar that you spend in transportation, subject to a cost aid percentage. So what you saved in transportation expenses last year is going to have a negative impact on your transportation aid revenue that you see in 2020-21. And you'll see that you have set aside some monies to offset the loss of that revenue. So you took the savings this year and you set aside some of that into fund balance to offset the decrease in the revenue next year. Next slide, please. So your general fund revenue and other sources increased by $10.3 million, and your expenditures and other uses decreased by $72.2 million. Again, due to the pandemic and also the cost saving measures. The staffing cuts alone were estimated to be about $47.4 million of this. And that was based on the reduction of about 438 FTEs. We also tried to measure your total fund balance as a percentage of your next year's budget. And we have an analysis on this next page, but this year was about 10.5%. Now on the next slide, we have some historical numbers. You can see, where your fund balance was comparative from 2018 through 2020, and then how you compare to 3 of the other big 5 school districts based on fiscal years. Now, Buffalo, this was based on current year information, while Syracuse and Yonkers, they did not have 2020 financial information on their website.
Kathy, can I ask you to pause for a minute?
Sure.
And this is your screen. Could you increase can you zoom in on it a little bit so that the numbers are a little bit more distinct?
Bigger?
So I raised my hand for the previous slide. I don't know if anybody's actually monitoring the hand thing or if you want us to wait.
Sorry, do you want to go back or do you want to deal with that now?
Yeah, can we go back, please? Anissa, are you looking at the hands?
I can see the hand, but
Okay.
when I'm doing the slide and I only see some of the hands, which is a little bit weird. And it's probably because of my lack of work experience.
You got to move it up and down. I just wanted to actually ask about the expenditures. And the other uses decreased by the 72.2 million. Did you say 47.7 million was as a result of 438 FTEs reduction?
That's an estimate, yes.
Okay. And then, so I did a quick calculation and it left 24.5 million. And the reason I'm honing in on this particular piece is because this has been a hot topic conversation for the board in terms of what savings were actualized or reduced since we closed from March until June. But then the 24.5 million shows up again in the CAFR as a savings in transportation. So,
Right.
And I know that there's been conversation that there had to be other savings realized or actualized from school closures. And I don't know if in your audit, you had the opportunity. It's a weird audit. I want to acknowledge that to the community, right? Because we start off as starting school and everything is going normally from September up until March, and then we shut down and then things vastly change for everybody. But in your audit, there was a way to look at any actual savings realized from March to June beyond the 72.2 that takes into the account the reductions of FTEs and transportation.
So I guess I would say you would want to go back to the slide right before this where, we saw that the areas of savings due to the shutdown, that second large bullet, operation of facilities, 2.6, transportation, 25.9, and then temporary staff. So that was just those were estimates from just the shutdown of cost savings. So when you get to the $47.4 million, that was a combination of the cost-cutting measures that were taken in December in response to the deficit, as well as cost savings in the personnel side, I believe, due to the shutdown. So
Okay,
it's a combination of the two.
Yeah, thank you. This is great because I think these are some of the numbers that some board members have been asking about in terms of what were their savings actualized, and these are numbers that they can reference back to. So I appreciate it.
And some of this information is actually written in the MD&A, and then other information I got from your budget director.
Thank you. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. And if you want to forward to that trend analysis. Oh, back one.
Next one?
Back one.
Okay.
So you can see, where your fund balances were 2018, 19, and 20, and then how you compare it to Buffalo, Syracuse, and Yonkers. So the restricted fund, the non-spendable fund balance is what you have set aside in prepaid prepayments and inventory. I mean, that's for everybody. Restricted fund balance are those legal restrictions for which are available under either education law or general municipal law. The committed fund balance are funds that are committed by the board or their designee. So those are funds that you set aside that you commit for specific initiatives. The assigned fund balance is, again, funds set aside, but they don't require board action. So that's been set aside upon, I believe it's the superintendent or their designee, which would be the CFO. And you can see that in 2019, because you had the deficit in the unassigned fund balance, you were not able to report any committed or assigned. You may have internally committed and assigned funds, but for financial reporting purposes, you couldn't display those. So you can see where you were in 2018 with the committed and assigned fund balances. They were completely eliminated in 2019, and then in 2020, you were able to redevelop those because you had positive fund balance. So the other big five don't commit fund balance. They don't, it's an option up to you, and it really depends on where you are in your budget, what you're committing funds for. So many times things are committed, like transportation is one good example. So you had cost savings this year, and you're taking that cost savings and you're offsetting revenue shortfalls next year by setting aside some of that fund balance. And that is included in your assigned fund balance. You assigned, actually, let's move to the next slide. The next slide will help in this discussion. So we'll walk through these. So the committed fund balance, you are self-insured for health insurance, workers' comp, and OPEB. So these are monies that you set aside for those type of expenditures. It may be because of cost savings this year that those funds, or that you are just saving money because you can't always assume that you're not going to have big fluctuations in these areas because you're self-funded. If you were insured in these areas, you would have a flat premium that you could budget for every year. But because you're self-funded, those expenses could ebb and flow. So you're setting aside monies to offset any budgetary provisions that aren't sufficient for those expenses. Particularly with insurance this year, we saw, sorry, Anissa?
Commissioner Powell has her hand up. Sorry, I just didn't want to get too far ahead of her. Not
Okay.
sure what her topic was. You're muted, Commissioner Powell.
Sorry, thank you. You noted that the other big five don't use the committed option under the GASB. Do they also not self-insure? Are they also, because that would make a big difference, wouldn't it?
I can't tell you if they all self-insure. Buffalo does self-insure for some of these risks. I don't know about the other big five.
It seems to me that they would have to have, if they're self-insure, they'd have to have set the funding aside in some way. Perhaps they use restricted instead of committed.
Possibly.
Well, okay, I don't want to get ahead of you, so I'm going to stop there.
Commissioner LeBron, has her hand up.
Yeah, I was just a little, I guess I wanted some clarity on some of the stuff Commissioner Powell was just mentioning, because I know Buffalo does have an unassigned fund balance, and theirs is pretty hefty. They have a good chunk of savings, in my opinion. But the other piece, though, in relation to this slide in particular, the insurance claims and workers' comp and the OPEB lines that you're mentioning here, that is something that one of our collective bargaining units put in a letter to us from their own analysis, that this is something that the board can control. But in reality, this is in the contract that we have to provide these things, and so we do. But we don't know what the exact amount is going to be every year because we are self-insured. So if we are not responsible as a board to make the best guesstimate that we can on this cost, and we come in and we cut this line so that we then on the other end don't cut additional staff, we could potentially be setting ourselves up for even a further larger deficit down the road. And I do think health insurance is going to be one of those budget line items, but areas where we are going to see a significant increase over the next year, just because of COVID and the impact of that. We don't even know who's 100% fully responsible for even paying for COVID testing, let alone treatment and the vaccine, and which insurances will cover it. So I just want to put that out there on the record, Catherine, because this is a line item specifically that has been specifically addressed to us. And I just want the community to understand that because we're self-insured, we have to take the best guesstimate that we can, but this can fluctuate because of rising healthcare costs. If we have a number of people that we employ that end up going to the emergency room or the hospitals or have higher medical needs this year because of COVID, we have to endure those costs. So, and that impacts on our budget too. And I want people to understand how that works for us here.
Yeah, the one item that I don't see most school districts committing funds for is OPEB, because that is a very long-term liability, and that fluctuates less on a year-to-year basis. You generally know what you're paying out for your retiree health insurance when you build your budget. Now, hopefully you build enough money into that budget, but that one is probably one that is less immediate and really doesn't deal with self-insurance. When you talk about insurance claims, workers' comp, and health insurance, those are the ones that are self-funded. And you mentioned the health insurance. So not only do you have all the COVID-related expenses that are kind of an unknown for 2021, but you also saw, and as well as all school districts, saw a decrease in health insurance claims in 2019-20 because of all the elective surgeries that were canceled. So we're fully anticipating that those surgeries, once hospitals reopened for those surgeries, that people went in and had those elective surgeries. So on top of COVID, you've got all those elective surgeries that got passed from your 2020 budget to your 2021 budget.
Commissioner Powell put her hand back up.
Thank you. So I have a proposition at this point that obviously the committed funds were the result of board action, and they reflect board action that was taken in or before the fiscal year 2019-20. So they're appropriately stated there, regardless of whether other districts have done this or not. I propose that we make this an agenda item in an upcoming finance committee meeting, that we discuss what funds should be restricted, committed, assigned, unassigned, because quite frankly, the set aside in the assigned for transportation really ought to be something committed. Because we do understand the need to set that aside, because of the reimbursement lag of 1 year. Perhaps I would argue that the health insurance set aside of $5 million should be either committed or restricted. But but this page reflects what decisions the board made for fiscal year 1920. So I propose that we take this up for an agenda item sometime during the year, fiscal year 2021, and that we be prepared for that conversation during the 21-22 budget year. I don't know if we want to actually have a dialogue about that now or wait till after Kathy's presentation. I don't hear any other feedbacks. I'm going to suggest that Kathy continue on.
All I can say is that seems to make sense to me. The more definitive we are in terms of what we're committing ourselves to. But what even makes more sense to me is that we would at least agree to discuss this at an appropriate finance committee meeting. I think that makes a lot of sense. This would give people an opportunity to take some time to study the idea and to dialogue on it. So I can't see why we wouldn't at least do that, put it on to an agenda for finance. Commissioner LeBron, would you have any objection to taking that up?
No, and I can work with staff and our CFO to also give some recommendations based on some of the budget line items that are going to be coming up. But I just want to point out to the board that we actually already voted on the transportation piece at the last board meeting. And so I can ask staff to pull up that resolution and remind you guys, but we already passed the resolution that says we were going to set aside the transportation money and not touch it.
I think that you will find that the discussion did not result in a resolution that moves the funds to a committed category.
I'm sure, but I will have staff pull it up.
Not in the 2019-20 fiscal year. Otherwise, it would not appear in the CAFR and in the financial reports under the assigned, rather than it would have been up in the committed if we had taken the proper resolution action for FY 1920.
Kathleen, would that have been the case if that resolution just passed?
No, it would have had to have passed prior to June 30th.
Okay, thank you. It just passed. So I just want to remind the board, and I'll work with the staff to pull that up and send it back out to the full board so that they are reminded. Thank you.
Commissioner Powell, does that successfully resolve your request?
Yeah, it does, as far as the committed. As I say, this presentation and the CAFR reflect where we were as of fiscal year end. But I would also note, though, that the exact status of the assigned and unassigned, I submit to you all that was pretty fluid as of, was it June 31st? That's our CAFR year end?
30th.
Yeah, June 30. Yeah, there is no 31st, sorry. Okay. All right, back to you, Kathleen.
Any other questions on this slide? Okay, then the next slide, we talk about, where you are with in comparison to your budget and also historical. So this is really just for your reference. Again, very high level of changes, actual to actual and budget to actual. The next slide talks about some of the financial results in the other funds, funds other than the general fund. So in your special aid fund, you had $119 million in grants in the current year. That's up slightly from 2019. Your school lunch fund, you did have an operating deficit in the current year of $2.2 million due to, again, the closing of the schools and not having any lunch sales in those last 3 months. You have put aside monies for the school lunch fund in the assigned fund balance to cover the losses for this year. Your capital fund, you did spend less in your capital fund by about $12 million than you did in 2019. Part of that is the $10 million that Commissioner LeBron had mentioned. And then in your debt service fund, the transfer in from the general fund to cover your debt service payments was $81.6 million. So as you look forward, you know, if you thought 1920 was a difficult year to analyze, 2021 is not going to be any better. It is definitely a world of unknowns. State aid, you know, we have a new president-elect, still have not heard of whether there's going to be another round of funding that will go to local governments. The state, you know, financial condition is not good. I don't see, and you know, whether you like the governor, don't like the governor, I don't see where they have the funding available to fund schools at 100% of what they had promised when you built your budget for 2021 without getting additional federal funding. So there's that threat out there that they could cut your state aid by 20%. And if you look at just the foundation aid, based on what the amount of foundation that aid you received in 1920, because you received your full, basically your full allotment, other than I think that they were still holding 20% of the last payment at the end of the year. 20% of your foundation aid last year would be about $75 million. That, you know, if they hold true with the possibility of cutting your state aid by 20%, that would have a $75 million impact on just your foundation aid. And then you've got the COVID. You know, COVID, you know, for better or worse, it really helped you out financially in 1920. You've had to move to a remote environment. You've had to, you know, modify your classrooms to make them safe for your students when they come back. There's a whole slew of unknowns on how much COVID is going to either save or cost you going into 2021 and how long this is going to last. So given all the unknowns, my advice to you is to, you know, continue to very carefully monitor your revenue and your expenses, modify your budget if necessary to reflect, you know, changes in your state aid if there's going to be cutbacks, significant changes on your expenditure side, either positive or negative due to the COVID, and then to really, as much as I hate to say it, you know, continue to work under your austerity budget to the extent possible, because it's like throwing a dart at a target. You really just don't know where you're going to be at the end of the year. You know, you're into December. You should be looking at cash flow analysis on a regular basis, as well as fund balance projections based on the best estimates that your CFO and your accounting department can give you at this point. But it is really the wild card year.
Is that the end of your presentation? Oh, no, it isn't. Okay.
So that's the end of the financial analysis. We also provide the board with our report to the Board of Education, which is what we call our management letter. NISA has a copy of that. I don't know, NISA, have they been provided with a copy of the management letter?
I'm actually going to be putting the management letters inside in the next with their with the final opinions that I received.
Okay. Okay. So a basic overview of that. It talks about, the first 2 pages talks about what our responsibilities are to you, the board, under our professional standards. Those were all outlined in our engagement letter. If you adopted any new accounting policies, if you had any significant, thank you, Anissa. I'm on page 1. Next page.
Wow, I get a lot of blank pages here.
Keep going.
You're killing me. Now we're getting somewhere.
Okay, so we talk about our responsibilities to you. If there had been an adoption of any new accounting policies, it would be disclosed here. You can see that right at the bottom of the screen, of which there were none other than GASB 95. And all GASB 95 is postponed the implementation of other previously issued GASBs. There were no significant or unusual transactions that we needed to bring to your opinion. The accounting estimates that are used in preparation of your government-wide financial statements are reported on pages 3 and 4 of this report. No significant issues that we discussed with management that would generally be problem areas as a result of the audit. Again, no audit adjustments or uncorrected misstatements that were identified as part of our audit. So, kudos to your finance department with that. No difficulties, and there's a number of new GASBs that you need to be aware of, and those are reported on page 5. Starting or on page 7 and 8, there were a couple of matters that we wanted to bring to your attention as a result of the audit. I'll let Nissa get to those pages. There you go. 2 things. Information technology, and these items have been vetted with NISA. We talked about a number of different things that came up with the audit, but these are the 2 items that we felt elevated itself to issues that had some risk to it that we felt need to be brought to the board's attention. So with respect to information technology, it really had to do with remote access to your IT systems, whether it be your financial management system, your student management system, HVAC control access, and making sure that you have a process in place to allow remote access. Now, during the pandemic, everyone was forced to work remotely in a very short period of time, in a matter of days, and access had to be granted so business could continue. Your schools were closed, but the business of education still was occurring. And that we felt that although you had a process in place, that it wasn't formally documented and it wasn't being tracked to the level that we thought it was necessary. So really we're recommending that the process be documented, and you're going to utilize some of your existing system profiles to track remote access to your different systems. And also written there is some of the controls that you do have in place already, including multi-factor authentication.
I do want to note that Chief Vanderwater and Marcus Ellison, who's in charge of the network, sat down, vetted these items, and established the appropriate management action plans for these items, for this particular item at least. The next item actually was addressed by our Chief Financial Officer, Pierce, as well as Carrie Couples, as it relates to extra classroom. Go right ahead, Kathy.
I see that Commissioner Malloy has her hand up, and then I have a question. Commissioner Malloy?
Thank you. Thank you. So I guess I was just wondering, let's see, if there was anything, you had mentioned that we need to continue to monitor our revenues and expenditures very closely. So I was wondering if perhaps this is unrelated, but I'm wondering if you can offer us any recommendations for like district software to accomplish this task.
There's a number of softwares that are out there. Buffalo, I believe, uses Munis. Rochester, the city of Rochester, they just switched systems a year or so ago. I believe they are using a form of Munis, if I'm not mistaken. You know, the other softwares I'm familiar with, I don't know if they would be adequate for your needs given your size. But PeopleSoft certainly seems to have its challenges and its drawbacks with respect to you know, the monitoring function of your budget.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. For my question, if you, Anissa, if you could scroll back to the bottom of the page that starts other matters. I think it's, oh, okay. Yeah, that page. Under management response, I'm sorry. Under management response, it says, as of January 1st, 2021, we will start using our existing JIRA system. I thought as part of our conversation with the with our monitor that we were abandoning JIRA and taking up a different software. That probably is a, because this is management response, maybe this is a question for the superintendent. Is she on the line?
She might be, but I am willing to help on this question.
Okay, sure. Can you help?
I can as well. Go ahead, Anissa.
Oh, I don't, Dr. Myers-Small, or do you want me to respond, or do you want to go ahead?
You can. I was just trying to get to the unmute button. I couldn't get there quickly.
Good, no problem. So the IM&T function is actually utilizing JIRA for their trouble ticketing system. So this is actually a wonderful tool that they actually use for different things that they're monitoring. I think you might be referring to JIRA when we were doing it for the DE report. Could you possibly be referring to that?
Well, that is what I'm thinking, but I'm awfully glad to hear that we didn't buy it just for that it has some utility beyond what was being used for our distinguished educator package. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not trying to rain on administration's parade, but it's actually rather robust, and it actually is very, very functional, and they can get reporting out of it, and it's very helpful for the IM&T function, but only because I was working with Chief Vanderwater. So I just want to throw that out.
Yeah, Willa, my impression was that they had utilized that system previous. I don't think they bought it for the purpose of keeping track of as a project management tool just for our distinguished educator action plan. I think Anne Marie saw the value that it could serve for the purpose of tracking our commitments under the action plan and utilize for that purpose. But as Anissa says, it has other purposes as well. The other thing that I would note, Willa, you are correct. I don't know if we would say it's correct to say we abandon it, but given the independent monitors plans, financial and academic, that very exhaustive effort that we put in, I won't get on my soapbox about that. It's pretty much not the focus of our efforts anymore. And so whatever project management software program we're going to use, whatever we're going to use to monitor that, we won't be monitoring that action plan that we spent 9 months on, which the state of New York said it's a plan that we can build our future on, and then just conveniently left it out of the legislation, which left Shelley no choice but to focus on something other than that. So JIRA and that action plan really, shamefully, are no longer going to be utilized by this district.
Thanks for sharing that, you know, for the general public as well. But okay, Kathleen, I don't think there are any other, oh, Amy, is that an old hand?
Yeah, it is an old hand. Thanks.
Okay, Kathleen, if you want to continue.
Sure. So the last item is our favorite topic of conversation, extracurricular activities. While we do still have a qualification of our audit opinion, I'm happy to say we did see an improvement in the results of our test of internal controls in this area. Now, it could be for two reasons. It could be that your internal controls truly are improving, or it could be that the schools and the clubs that we selected for testing were doing a better job following your internal controls than maybe some of the ones that we had tested in the past. So I can't really say that the improvement this year is a district-wide improvement. My hope is that it is, but it will only really be proven true over time.
I would like to mention on this particular topic, when we knew we were closing for COVID-related issues and a lot of the activities for extracurricular had not quite taken place because it was about the timing of things such as prom, et cetera, where a lot of the spending and disbursements would occur. I would like to recognize the accounting function and the team under Gary Couples. They actually were very proactive working with the buildings, and even right before teachers left buildings, we ensured, with the support of school chiefs, we formally requested that all of the documentation be forwarded and the books be closed out appropriately too. So I think this also helped our report come out better and helped raise visibility of these controls.
And that's the end of my report.
Oh, at this time, does anyone have any other questions for our auditor, Catherine Barrett?
Commissioner Powell, I just wanted, there were questions that I submitted to Anissa. How are we handling those questions? Do I need to ask those questions, or will they be returned in written form back to me?
We did get answers to some of the questions. Why don't you just toss out the one that comes to mind, and let's see if it was asked and whether it was captured in the log and whether an answer was already provided.
Anissa, can you respond to that? Do you have the questions? Okay.
I included your questions both in the log, and I also forwarded those questions with which Kathy was hoping some of her dialogue would cover some of your concerns. But I believe she could probably speak to the specific questions that we have. If you don't mind me going ahead and identifying the first one for everyone's benefit so Kathy can share with us. Your first was asking just to be reminded how the board managed to miss the financial, how did the board miss the financial problems of last year? Remind me what the board should be looking at and the questions we should be asking going forward.
Yeah, so, you know, it really because of some of the limitations in your PeopleSoft software, you're going to have to rely on some budget to actual reports that are going to be a culmination of information from PeopleSoft, as well as budgetary information that is maintained by your finance office. That's not ideal. You know, most of the schools that we deal with, they have a software that allows them to see, you know, what the budget is, what a modified budget is, how that compares to what you've spent to date, and what you have available to spend through the rest of the year. So they can use that information. They get that information on a monthly basis, and they use that information to monitor their spending. PeopleSoft does not have that capability, from what I understand. So, you know, you have your expenditures to date, but you're really relying on the finance office and your budget office to provide you with how it compares to what you've budgeted for the year and what you have left to spend, and projections of, are you going to spend all this money? Are you not going to spend all this money? Do you need to move money around because you're going to overspend in some areas and underspend in others? So that's kind of how you got into the problem to begin with, is that the budget and finance office that existed at the time was not doing a very good job of providing you with projections of where you stand current date in comparison to your budget. As far as what I think you need to look at to prevent that from going in the future, cash flow analysis, as well as fund balance analysis. Those are the two types of information that I believe that are going to be very important for you to monitor your fund balance going forward and prevent what happened in 2019 to recur.
Thank you.
Your second question, Vice President Elliott, was about safeguards and controls. That was appropriately directed to management, which is included in the question log. I'm sure you noticed that is the second question inside of the question log that I embedded it there. The next question that you were hoping that Kathy could address was to better explain the audit opinion, and more specifically the language that you have, where it states, we do not express an opinion or provide any assurance on the information because of the limited procedures do not provide us with sufficient evidence to express an opinion or provide assurance. And you were specifically speaking on page 16. And
yeah,
you're wondering
so
why.
that's specifically related to the required supplemental information that's included in the CAFR, and that is certain budget to actual reports. It's information from the ERS, or from the employee retirement system and the teacher's retirement system regarding the funded status of your funded status in the plan, as well as information on the actuarial liability of your other post-employment benefit plan. So we do not audit that information. That information is provided to us. We review it. We make sure it's consistent with what's in your financial statements, but we don't audit that information. And that's why that language is in that paragraph.
Thank you.
The other two questions are the last two that I believe you're hoping she spoke to. Some of it she's included in her presentation, but I don't know if it was clear enough for you. Specifically, you were trying to understand the unrestricted net deficit of $873,184,841 on page 39.
So on page 39.
On 39, she was reading the MD&A, and probably, I think that might be where she was. I have to look at, see, but, oh no, she was actually on financials there. $873. I don't see that number.
I don't either.
It's in there, unless I got the wrong page number.
Which is not a problem. I guess you want to better understand the unrestricted net deficit, and
right, that 872 million, million as a deficit. I guess I need to understand the accounting definition of that deficit of 872 million.
I found it. So you were looking at page 35 at the statement of net position at the bottom, and she was trying to understand the net position, and we arrived at it by entering the deficit of $873 million, and she wants to better understand that.
That has to do with the retirement costs. Is that right, Catherine?
There's a lot of things that go into this because this is based on your full accrual basis of accounting. So yes, included in that number is your liability in the TRS and ERS retirement system. you bear with me for just a minute, I can tell you what that liability is.
While you're doing that, can you explain a little bit about why this is very misleading and it presents somewhat of a problem for most governmental agencies?
Well, I wouldn't call it misleading.
Unuseful, unhelpful.
Well, it's a very long-term perspective. So I found your OPEB liability first. So your OPEB liability, and again, this is a very long-term liability. It's an actuarially determined liability of what the costs are going to be over as what the expected long-term costs as of June 30th, 2020 is for all of your retiree health insurance. And that is almost $52 million is the actuarially determined liability for your post-employment health insurance benefits to your current active employees as well as retirees. So if the school were to close on June 30th, 2020, that would be the liability that you would be expected to pay out for your current active employees and your retirees under your current contractual obligations.
So that only includes retirement benefits in that number? What else is included in that?
That's just health insurance benefits.
Okay, Anissa, I'm gonna ask you to help me understand that better, not at this time, but help me to understand that, because I'm not getting it. I don't seem to be able to process it to ask the intelligent questions about it right now. So Anissa, we'll get together afterwards. Thank you.
The last question you had as it related to the numbers in the financials, this is related. I actually, can you see my screen? The administration, the accounting staff put together an estimate to arrive at the number that you had a question about. Specifically, we're concerned about long-term liability. So this is all a related conversation in a sense. And they actually did a reconciliation to arrive at the figure that you had a question about. Can you see my screen, or is it still too small?
I can see it.
Okay. And I think that answers it. It really is kind of regurgitating what is in the financial statements and what numbers made up that particular figure.
So at some point, should we be looking at visiting our retiree healthcare policy or practice at some point? Because that's just that it's are we vulnerable at this state with having a liability in the amount of almost $2 billion? Am I asking the right question, or am I not asking it correctly?
It's a contractual obligation, so it's something that would have to be negotiated with your collective bargaining units. And good luck. It's a very rich benefit, and they don't give up that benefit easily.
If we can't pay it, if to the Auditor General's point that it's, or was it your point, Catherine? If we were to close as of June 2020, we wouldn't be paying it anyway. So it would seem to me that there would be some kind of special interest to be able to look at how can we renegotiate that at some point. So I'm going to just rely on the superintendent and her staff to see if we can, they can help in terms of convincing our unions that we need to look at things a little bit differently now. So thank you.
It's something, it's not a hopeless case. We have seen school districts renegotiate that. It's usually something that, existing employees are grandfathered in, and they get the very rich benefit of, some of them are lifetime health insurance benefits. And then, going forward, anybody that's a new employee, you put a cap on that benefit. Maybe they get the benefit for 10 years post employment rather than for life. But they're going to ask for something in exchange. It's really a matter of doing the cost benefit analysis on a long-term basis.
Cynthia, this is one of those areas that when we talk about charter schools, the biggest difference between ourselves and charter schools, especially when they first started up, is that we had to build into our budget every year accommodations for the quote unquote legacy costs, the ERS, TRS, post-employment health benefits. These were costs that when charter schools first opened, their books show $0 because they had 0 retirees. And so, this gave the startup charter schools a tremendous advantage of being able to essentially deliver education services more at a lower cost than the regular public schools. But I think the good news is we're not going to be closing our doors on any one June 30th, right? One advantage of government is that with the exception of an honest to goodness bankruptcy, we're not likely to be left to our own resources in that way. So even lenders understand that and discount this page of the of our financials when they consider what our financial risk is for lending. And as you see, for the bonds from FMP represent a significant portion of that amount as well. Are there any other questions? Cynthia, are you happy? Are you comfortable with the answers you received?
This is something, Commissioner Powell, that I may want to take up in the HR committee for more thorough analysis of the retiree healthcare allocation.
Be my guest. Any other questions though?
No.
Cynthia? Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any remaining questions? If not, I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair to have my last say. Anissa, could you go back to the presentation page that listed the restricted, committed, assigned, unassigned? I want to share with you, my colleagues, that I intended to have a lot to say about this page. But the conversation, starting with the fact that from a legal standpoint, there's no difference between assigned and unassigned fund balances. And just the fact that in our previous conversation, we talked about things that probably should be in the committed restricted area, including the set aside for transportation and the set aside that was negotiated in the contracts for the health insurance contingency. Seeing as how at least from our previous conversation, at the very least, the transportation may or may not have been authorized to move since June 30th. I'm going to keep my own counsel about this and recognize that, as I say, there's no difference between assigned and unassigned, and they do not reflect actions taken by the Board of Education. So I'm looking to have a deeper discussion about assigned and unassigned when the Finance Committee talks about about this as we agreed to do just a few minutes ago. And I'm going to recommend that the CAFR be advanced out of the audit committee to the full board for approval at its business meeting later this month. Would anyone like to make that motion?
Motion.
So,
Okay, I have a motion from Amy. Commissioner Elliott, would you like to second?
second.
Okay, thank you. Are sort of both on top of each other on that one. Anissa, can we have the Brady Bunch screen back? Can you stop screen sharing? All right, before I call for a vote, we have a motion and a second. One last chance for anyone to have ask questions, make a statement, comment. My thanks to Catherine Barrett for her presentation. Still looking, no hands? No hands. I guess I won't delay this any further. I'll just call for a vote. All in favor of advancing this to the full board?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? No, okay, the motion carries unanimously. I think that completes my obligation.
Commissioner
So
Powell, if I can mention something first?
I'm sorry,
If you don't-
somebody else trying to talk?
No, it's me. Can I just mention a couple items just for the board's information?
Sure.
So we will have a final draft CAFR at the next business meeting. That is going to include the final opinion letters. I received those today. And those will be signed and dated. So those pages will be changing from the document, but that is the only change that will occur. I've already submitted a resolution for the next meeting at the business meeting for you to accept the CAFR. That's required so we can file it with the state in time. That must be submitted by the first of the year. And then the last item, we would like to note that the audit is not yet complete. In this year's CAFR, we're missing the single audit. We weren't able to do that as of yet. I believe Freed, Maxick, and everyone else for that matter is waiting for the guidance on what needs to happen for single audit, which is for the federal funds. So that last piece will apparently be audited in the beginning of the new year as soon as we can come up with a date for that audit work. And I'll be coming back to you for that one small section because it is not here because we were unable to do it. That is it for me. Thank you.
Okay. At this time, I'd like to turn the gavel back to our board president for the remainder of the meeting.
Well, let's hope that won't be too long. But before I do that, I accept the gavel back, but I do want to thank you, Commissioner Powell, for leading that work. This is anybody who took the opportunity to read Freed Maxick's extensive report. It's very serious work and important work. And in that regard, on behalf of the board, I also want to thank Freed Maxick and Catherine for her diligent work. She has been a partner with this board through some difficult and challenging stuff, and we appreciate that work. And it has not always been easy, and a year ago it was very difficult, but had you not been there providing the support, we wouldn't be where we are today. And I think there's no doubt, while we're not where we want to be, we're certainly not where we were, and we credit the board, I'm sure, credits you and your firm for helping us on this journey. So thank you for that as well. And last but not least, of course, thank you, Anissa. You have been there from the beginning, so to speak. I think you were appointed Auditor General when the law came into place, weren't you? Right? So you've
We have
been
never had any other Auditor General.
That's right. You've been our own Auditor General. So thank you for your service up until today. It's really appreciated. All right. So where that leads us is new business. And Leslie, I understand there's some new business you'd like to address to the board.
Thank you, President White. Good evening, everyone. And I promise this will be short, but this is an important announcement. I just want the Board of Education and our listeners to know that we are extending the deadline for our return to in-person learning survey or remaining in remote until this Friday, December 11th at close of the school day. We need all parents and caregivers to respond at this time. Schools have been working diligently to reach out to families and to find out what their preferred choice is. So either the hybrid model of 2 days in-person instruction or to remain fully remote. If families do not respond by December 11th, those students will continue to learn remotely. So if you've not heard, as a parent or caregiver, if you've not heard from your child's school, please reach out to the school and update your contact information. And this is an important data point. As of today, close of business, 78% of our elementary families have responded, and 62% of our district secondary students have responded. So higher response rate at elementary. We've reached out to families through phone calls, emails. We've not only the district social media account, but individual social media accounts by school. So teachers have also been sending out forms to parents. We've been posting information in Seesaw and Google Classroom, which is the online learning platform, while students learn remotely. The survey, it's also important. We also mention the New York State COVID testing and the parent consent that's required being in orange, which we are right now. And that's also required for if we shift to the red zone. So as I shared in earlier board meeting, this information determines staffing, transportation, and food service needs. So it's really, really important that we hear for our families on Friday, because that's our deadline. So commissioners, if you using your different platforms, whether it's social media or email, Commissioner LeBron, I know you do an update on Facebook. If we could really get the word out, Commissioner Adams, through your parent contacts, everyone, you would reach out and just remind our parents, our caregivers, our community that December 11th, this Friday, is our deadline for that decision-making process. 78% elementary students have responded and 62% secondary. I appreciate all the help that you could give us to get that word out. Thank you.
I see Commissioner Malloy and Commissioner Powell have raised their hands. Commissioner Malloy.
Thank you very much. Dr. Myers-Small, can you give us any indication so far as to where families are falling in terms of maybe perhaps the percentage that we're seeing so far, choosing either hybrid versus remote? I do want to reiterate for the district what the ramifications of this are. So if they're choosing remote instruction, that's basically 4 days of continuity of instruction for students versus hybrid instruction, which is just 2 days of synchronous learning versus 3 days of asynchronous instructions. Can you just clarify for us? Thank you.
Sure can. So overall, with the 78% of our elementary families who have made a decision, 29% have requested in person as opposed to 43% remote. And at the secondary level, 22% of our secondary students have requested in person or the hybrid model, and 36% remote. So the numbers are lower than I thought they would be. I naturally assumed that they would be, obviously there would be a higher number of elementary families choosing to come back, but I did not anticipate that it would be, those percentages would be that low.
Just a follow-up question is, if parents choose all remote option, if, for instance, sports, the state deems that sports can be played, what are the options for our families that are choosing remote? Will they still have access to participation in sports or other extracurriculars? Thank you.
I think that's something that Dr. Cotto and Dr. Black are still trying to maneuver through. I think, other school districts have, struggled along with that, and it has been all across the board. Some school districts have said if you're remote, that, it just makes it more difficult. I know our commissioner, interim commissioner, Rosa has been pretty adamant that even if students are remote, we work the best that we can to ensure that they are able to participate. I think the key thing, though, is the testing piece, and to make sure that students are consenting to test.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Powell?
Thank you. Before I ask my question, I have to admit I screwed up. While we were still in the audit committee function, I should have asked the question whether any board member would like to go into executive session to discuss any parts of the CAFR. The education law 2116-C does allow us to go into executive session. I'm just not sure if any of my colleagues feel inclined or feel it necessary to ask our auditor any questions under the seal of executive session. So if anyone feels that need, they need to let me know so we can call Catherine back into the Zoom call.
Commissioner Powell, I was going to do that towards the end, but I'm glad you did. I think the more appropriate time to do it was at the end of the discussion that you had, so I'm glad you did that. But yes, Steve and I had already conferred that.
Did leave the call, so if we want her, if we need to talk to her, we need to get her back on the call. That's why I raise it now.
Sure. Anybody feel that need? Well, that saves us all a motion to go into executive session.
Good. Okay, so my question was more along the lines of Commissioner Malloy's, Madam Superintendent. Of those who did not respond, is it presumed that we do not have valid contact information? Because I can tell you that I got the robocall, and probably less than 2 hours after I got the robocall, someone from the school called me. And that's when I found out that a number of email addresses were out of date. So this is, to the extent we're able to reach parents by any means, this is a great way to update that contact information. But I wonder if the vast majority of these no answers is because we don't have valid contact information.
That is correct. That's why I shared that if parents haven't heard from us, if they're just happen to be listening on YouTube or Facebook, please reach out to us. It means that we don't either have an email or a phone number that is connected to them.
But now obviously we're able to reach the students. So can we get the students to provide us better contact information? Can the teachers have a list of students that have not yet responded and go
the survey was administered through Power School for the students to give us that information. We administered a survey through Power School, which goes directly to the students. I mean, we have used multimodal methods to really reach out, because this is critical. So we've reached out to students. Teachers have reached out to students. We've reached out to parents, caregivers. We're using every single method that we know, I think other than Pigeon. So yes.
So we have what, about a third of the population or maybe a quarter of the population where we don't have reliable information about parent contacts? That's
a problem for not only us, but other large school districts. Yes. So cell phone numbers change quickly at times, and so that it just makes it difficult.
Leslie, a couple things. Commissioner Powell, were you all set?
Yes, thank you.
Real quick, and perhaps you said this, do you have any kind of thing that I could screenshot and put on my Facebook page, some kind of notice, hey, contact the district? Was there anything like that put out?
We can get that to, Medisol can get that to all of you. You want like through text?
Well, yeah, you can just send it via text, and then I'll just screenshot it and put it on my Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter account. So that For me, that's the easiest way to do it. And then the other question is, how about DKX, WAM? Did anybody go on any of these stations, particularly DKX, and start talking about what the need is, the importance of getting this information out? Because I know Andre would probably welcome that.
Andre has been wonderful. I've been on, and I'm going to go on, what is today, Tuesday? So I'll go on Thursday and then probably Friday again, just at that, during that, what is it, around 7:40 in the morning, and just say, please, please, please don't forget. Yeah, Andre from DKX has been phenomenal at letting me come on and to be interviewed and to just get the word out. So
I'm set.
Yeah.
Commissioner, well, sort of, actually. Board Member Jallo.
Wow, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Leslie, this is really to you. I'm wondering if it's beneficial to share, if you can, some of the reasons why people have denied the opportunity to go hybrid. What are some of those reasons? And maybe there's an opportunity there to address some of those challenges that they're identifying that are causing them not to take up this opportunity.
So one of them is out of our control, Dr. Jallo, and that's simply because we're in Orange, right? That people are very hesitant and just concerned about the community spread, and that those numbers are frankly rising in Monroe County in particular, as well as across the United States. I think the vaccination on the horizon is certainly hopeful, and people are encouraged about that, but it's not here yet. My understanding is that we're going to get a shipment of about 2,000 next week, but that is just for healthcare. Educators are, they're on the first tier, educators are on the second tier. We do have, don't forget, on Thursday of this week, we have a group of physicians who are coming to talk to the Board of Education and to conduct a presentation. So if there are some parents between now and Friday who hear that presentation, that might change their mind or sway them in a different direction. I think what also is interesting, we found that when principals call, our administrators call, the return rate is higher than any other staff member who calls. So, you know, I haven't dug down and done the deep root analysis around that, but you know, if you think about that's difficult, especially for some of our larger schools to just do that, our secondary schools, if we just had the principals or assistant principals. But we have found when administration calls, the in-person yeses, or hybrid rather, yeses are high. The yeses are higher, but that's really what we've determined at this point. Oh, and I'm sorry, the other thing is that, you know, in remote, I mean, we were very purposeful when we went remote in for the start of the school year. It's 4 days of remote as opposed to 2 in person. So that I think, I know for one of our principals, Mary at RIA, said that her families really prefer the 4 days of remote still as opposed to the 2-day in person. Does that answer your question, Dr. Gell? I mean, that's, I
just think it's important to have an understanding as to why people are making the decisions that they're making. Some in your control, some, as you stated, are not in your control, but I think that's valuable information.
These questions are important, and certainly this topic is as well, but just a time check, we were set to
Man, I've had my hand up for a while and you've called on other people, you spoke.
Commissioner LeBron, I am going to get you. I was just making.
Okay, well, I know that there's a time check and I just want to jump in now and
Commissioner LeBron, if you just
time check.
If you just let me finish what I'm saying, you're the next person that I was going to call. I just wanted to remind folks, because people value keeping track with our agenda. Just reminding folks, it's 8 o'clock, but this is an important topic. And I'm glad that the superintendent brought it up, but there are questions. And one of the questions will come from you, Commissioner LeBron, and then Commissioner Malloy.
Anyway, that was a waste of time right there. But Leslie, I do want to mention that, you know, some of the feedback I heard from parents was that they fully didn't understand, like taking the survey, what that meant. And I know that it was mentioned here that it would be 2 days in person, whether they would be returned to their actual home school, if kids were going to be shuffled at other schools, but also what the testing was going to be like for kids if they agreed to. I know that Monroe County, Dr. Mendoza actually videotaped himself doing a school COVID testing, and I shared that on my social media. And but I didn't know if that was going to be one of the tests coming, for our district as well, if that was just for certain schools in the county. I will say, Mr. Piper from School 15 called. I didn't answer. He sent me an email, and I was able to email him. I was in the middle of something else, but that was one of the questions I had for him as well, like if he was aware of the type of testing that kids would be going through. Personally, I'm okay with, for myself at this point, with my kid going in 2 days a week and then being on her own learning for 3. Right now, as it stands, yeah, she has 4 days, but she already has Wednesday, a full entire day where she's learning on her own anyway, at her own pace, and going into the Google Classrooms.
Sure.
So I will say our kids know how to do it, right? Like they are, from even that one day, they know how to go into the Google Classrooms and pull down assignments and upload them for the most part. So any answers around that in terms of like what the testing will look like? I know that they said a certain percentage.
Yes.
And then I also just want to add that I do believe we're going to be in the red in just a few more days, if not, next week. And what the potential impact of that is if we offered hybrid and then we're in the red when the time comes to reopen. And my question is also related to special ed opening in January. So I know staff are just being notified now, but if we go into the red while we're closed for Christmas break and we reopen and we're still in the red, is special ed even going to be allowed to come back 4 days a week?
So let me answer the testing. When you're in orange, superintendents are very grateful for this because 100%, originally 100% needed to test. It's 20% over an entire month. So every 2 weeks you have to be at 10%. So it could, in theory, be 3% 1 week and 7%, 5 and 5, but it needs to be 20%, at least 20% over the entire month. If you are in the red, what changes is it's 30%. The test is a rapid test, and Commissioner LeBron, we are going to work on videos. I know that my superintendent colleagues have shared that it really did go over extremely well when the superintendent or someone got tested. So if you'd like to do a duet with me and do the rapid test, but it's it's painless, it's quick, it's one in each nostril. And the thing is, with older children, they can actually administer it to themselves. An adult doesn't even have to do that. So 20% orange, 30% red, as it stands from what the governor has shared with us. We know that that potentially could change, but that is the current status. We do know that if you don't get the 20% in orange or the 30% in red, then you automatically do have to shut down. And there are very severe penalties if you don't shut down. So it's one of these delicate balances that we can't force anybody of our students to test, but if they don't, then everybody is remote. So that's something that's important to put out there. As far as our students with disabilities, even if we are in red when we start up on January 4th, it's still the 20%. So we would start that first week with testing and getting those individuals who consent to test. They would be tested at their respective school site. So it's right there at each school where students are attending. I think the key point, Commissioner LeBron and others, is that we also have to really make sure that our students are wearing a mask. And there are very few exemptions to not wearing a mask. So a parent can't say, I can't get Beatrice to wear a mask, she's not going to wear a mask. That's not I don't want to, for lack of a better term, that's not a good reason. If you have it's like if you have a neurological disorder, if there's PTSD, and there's one other one that I just can't remember right now, but asthma is not a reason why you can't wear a mask. So the physicians who come and speak to you all on Thursday, please make sure you ask that if they don't go over that, but they will. So we have guidelines that are very specific where students do have to mask. Now you do get mask breaks, which, will be a part of the classroom routine, but you cannot go without a mask unless there's a very specific medical or neurological or emotional reason, and it's very specifically outlined. Does that answer your questions, Commissioner?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Malloy.
Great, thank you. Just to piggyback on what Commissioner LeBron has brought up regarding testing, in terms of the refusals, if people are to choose the hybrid model, if you have refusals for testing for those individuals or families that have chosen the hybrid model, have we planned in advance for what we will do for those students who still want the hybrid model? Are we going to guarantee maybe a third instructional model of allowing families to zoom in or students to zoom in to hybrid classrooms? Have we thought about where we're going with that? That's my first question. And then just secondly, I wanted to bring up perhaps the reason why many families do choose hybrid, thinking about maybe just the overarching childcare issues that we face in Monroe County, and the impetus for why people choose hybrid. There are many different reasons for this, but are there guarantees for the same teacher, for instance, if someone chooses hybrid? And what I think a lot of people are looking in terms of childcare issues. So anyway, two main points I wanted to bring up there.
So the first question, as far as a third instructional model, not at this time, but I know that Janelle and Melody, our deputy superintendents, have been working to try and figure out what makes the most sense. And see, this is where when people say, what is the problem, Rochester? Why aren't you moving forward? Why haven't you moved forward? There are so many nuances. If you just look at, if all of our students came back, we would have to test under the 30% model, 7,500 students. That's larger than the district that you work in, right? So so when you talk about instructional schedules and things of that nature, we are working through that as quickly as we can. We're going to be working with principals to look at that. It is very nuanced. We also know that if teachers have a medical accommodation, then no, you're not. Amy, you're a teacher. If you have a medical accommodation, as much as I want you as my child's teacher, if they choose the hybrid, you are not coming in. So you would be solely remote. So when parents say, well, I need to know the model, and if I'm going to be guaranteed our teacher, we're not trying to not be communicative. We're not trying to not be transparent. We don't know at this point. That's why this December 11th deadline is so important. So we know how many scholars we're talking about, and then who their corresponding teachers are. And we align that with those teachers that have a medical accommodation. So if you remember, I presented kind of all of those determining factors. Those are just two, but they're huge. And then
right. Well, I just wanted to, not to interrupt you here, but I as a teacher, I am in that third instructional model. I teach both hybrid and remote students. And so, when students refuse, or even students who need to quarantine, and just for privacy reasons, we have to protect their privacy under the HIPAA laws. People who have to zoom into my class, that is an instructional model. And I would hope that we would consider the burden that might place on many of our teachers who are already going above and beyond to provide superior sorts of situations for both hybrid and remote, and just the burden that might cause if they have to have students zooming in to a hybrid session. It's not the same instructional experience. So that's a concern I have.
It's complex, and I think I would be remiss if I just didn't pause right now and thank teachers in advance for what we are transitioning into. This is not easy. it is, and that's why I said patience and flexibility are going to be key. We are entering into this situation later than our suburban counterparts. And so we are going to have some bumps, but our teachers really, I'm very grateful for the fact that, we do have the opportunity to reopen for those scholars who choose to, but this is new frontier, and we recognize that. And so, on the other side, as administrators, as parents and caregivers, we're going to have to be really patient with our teachers as well as we maneuver through unique waters.
I'm looking at the list and I see Commissioner LeBron has her hands.
Actually, the second half of my question though was related to childcare.
No, go ahead.
Childcare issues, and just wondering if you're noticing that some of the families that are responding who want hybrid are perhaps families, if we're seeing an abundance of families who seem to require more childcare needs than maybe others.
So I'm not sure about that. I don't know if any one of our chief of schools, either Dr. Green or Dr. Peluso or Ms. Webster, have to answer that, because they're working much more directly with the principals. I don't know if anybody has just a response to that, if either Carmine or Shirley or Sheila.
Honestly, just anecdotally speaking, I feel that we have a number of families, many of our families who need that sort of support. And so many of our families are essential workers and providing services. And that might be, hybrid learning is a viable option for so many of those families.
Commissioner Lloyd, can you repeat that question again? I'm sorry.
I just wanted to know if perhaps in the responses that we have received so far from various families who have requested the hybrid model, if you're noticing that perhaps those families have unique childcare needs. I know that childcare is an issue countywide, and especially for families with more than one child. And I'm just wondering if we're noticing a trend at all in that respect.
So that has not been part of our questions that we pose, but certainly as we're working with our principals, we can try to get some of that information, but that has not been part of the conversation we've had.
And honestly, I do want to reiterate too, or just at least make this disclaimer that I realize that teachers are not childcare providers. So I just wanted to throw that out there and be clear about that. However, especially at the elementary school level, the childcare needs are much greater for families. And that might be a reason why families would want the hybrid model.
Commissioner LeBron, you had a question?
No, I just actually want to make a comment, and I'm going to add a comment around childcare. So there is a survey right now that I posted, but it's out there through United Way and both Common Ground and Healthy Kids. They are trying to assess the childcare needs for the community right now to then determine how United Way can then support and help and work with the county around childcare dollars. And there's actually, so there is a childcare group and that is exploring this. And we have some staff members that in the district that serve on that group too. But right now, at the very basic level, there is a survey open so that families can click on the link. And I know that we were going to also post it on our social media. I know Marisol was working on that. I don't know if you posted it yet or not. I know you were trying to schedule that out. So if it hasn't been out there, I'll repost it again. But it's important for anybody, any family members who need childcare to communicate that at this time, so that as they're making decisions around how childcare is going to look like in the next couple of weeks and months and how we can support families. I know that people look at the district to solve all the issues and we just possibly cannot, but we can partner and make sure we are working with organizations that are also exploring and looking at this and making sure we're working in one direction to support our families in this community. So there's that. In terms of the hybrid model, again, I selected that model, Leslie. I know that one of the questions that was also asked was whether I would need transportation. And for me, I don't need transportation because I do have the flexibility to make sure that I go pick her up and that my partner picks her up in the afternoon. But one of the things I thought about moving forward is that we, as a district, perhaps consider asking families whether they actually need transportation or not moving forward, and just plant that seed now so you can have it in the back of your head as we move forward in a state of past COVID, hopefully in the fall of 2021. But that's a question we really start to engage families on. Thank you.
All right. I'm looking at the participant list and I don't see any other hands. Looks like, nope. Commissioner Braun, it was an old hand. Yes, Superintendent.
Just the very last thing, I do want to thank the city and the county for the community testing partnership. Over the weekend, we had 4 sites at East, at Franklin, at Wilson, at the Jefferson campus, and it went very smoothly. Mike Schmidt and his team were very involved in that for the Rochester City School District side. But lots of people participated. They either drove up or walked up. And although, you know, there were several positive tests, it's showing that the testing is working and that we're discovering that so people can, you know, go into quarantine. So that's another critical partnership. We're working, I've reached out to the city and we're trying to figure out how we can continue to expand that because testing is critical. We are testing in the schools, our students and our staff. That's not testing for families, for grandma, for extended family members. So that is going to be necessary moving forward as well. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, indeed, that is good news that people are getting tested
Yes.
even when they're testing positive, because
Correct.
the community can keep some sense of where this dreaded disease is going and how we can prevent it. So thank you for sharing that good news. And on that, other than doing the survey, let's have that be the point where we end our meeting. So let's do the survey first. Kalia, can you pull that up for us? For those folks out there who are watching the district board meeting for the first time, at the end of every meeting, we sort of assess where we're at, how we did in our meeting, whether we accomplished anything of significance, whether we violated any of our bylaws, whether we made any difference in the lives of students through the things we discussed. So that's what we're doing now. And then we'll adjourn the meeting. Okay, Madam Clerk, why don't you tell me everybody's completed? We'll take a motion to adjourn and we'll go home and get some rest and spend some time with our families and maybe get some food too.
So no executive session this evening?
No, you know, Willa took care of that earlier on. There was a potential that we might have to discuss something with our external auditor, but we don't need to do that. I do have a question for Leslie. I saw on Facebook you had, I think it was on Facebook, maybe you told me, you had this like huge mixer making like, my wife actually saw it, 700 cookies or something like that.
1,700.
1,700 cookies?
Yeah.
Any chance, you know, a brother might get a chocolate chip? That's terrible, isn't it?
They're coming tomorrow to each board member. So.
All right. See, Carl was like, yeah. All right.
Leslie, you know I'm doing low carb.
Oh, sorry.
Give me her share. Give me Cynthia's share.
But I'm getting them.
Yes. Here's the thing, though. I do want to share. We chose artwork from students this year, so you're getting about 10 to 15 Christmas cards that are blank that you can send out to individuals, but it has beautiful Christmas or holiday artwork on the front and acknowledges the young person on the back. I'll bring them up during my board report so you can see them, but each child that we chose, their family will receive a pack of 10 or so So they have that. So that's something that I just like to do to acknowledge our students, and students get really thrilled when certainly you highlight what they're doing. And there's elementary and middle and high school artwork. So you'll be getting those cards with your cookies as well.
President White?
Yes, ma'am.
Just a shout out to RIA, Rochester International Academy. They did a food drop-off drive-by, and just want to acknowledge the Mary and the staff over there for that work that they're doing. I got an opportunity to participate over there in their drive-by, distributing food for Thanksgiving. So just a huge shout out to the work over at RIA. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, the poll is complete.
All right, all I need is a motion to go home and eat.
Motion.
I heard Commissioner Adams, second. Vice President Elliott, all those in favor, indicate by saying good night. Good night, everybody.
Good night.